Let's work on this cute blooming basket from Kimberbell and Me Time Delivered. Today I'm going to be working on the April 2025 Hoop Studio project. So let's open and take a look at what is inside of our Hoop Studio package. This month it's a cute little basket called the Blooming Basket. It's got some fun florals and some 3D felt flowers and a cute little handle to hang this little basket. So our postcard shows us what's in the kit, and it looks like we have, of course, the instructions. We have a leather strap, faux leather strap. We have embroidery felt. That is all these, as well as this piece. Then it has floral wire and some wooden beads. Some fabric. So there's two. There's kind of a linen looking fabric and then more of a solid. And then there's a couple pieces of this shape form, which is just like a stiff felt. And some wash away topping. Some batting. And then, of course, our little card. And then the embroidery files that I will go download from my account. Another website from Kimberbell called Me Time Delivered. And this is the Hoop Studio. So let's get started on this little basket. I will come to embroidery and to my USB, and I'm going to choose this little half circle that will be inside the basket. I do want to note that I put my USBs into a cord. This cord is always plugged into my machine, and I don't pull this cord in and out. It saves wear and tear on the port in my machine, and I just use that for my USBs. So I do have my 5x7 hoop already in my settings. I will hit set and embroidery, and I will go to the minus plus needle and get ready to stitch out the placement line. Now I do have, again, medium cutaway in my hoop, so let's get the placement started. Now I need to use the small piece of the shape form, which is kind of like a stiff felt, and I will just place it over and make sure I have all of my lines covered. And you can tape it or just hold it. I'll tape it at the top, and then we will run the tack down. After trimming the shape form, I ran the placement line for the lining fabric. I placed my fabric and ran the tack down. And now I'm ready to do the quilting. After the quilting, I will place the final piece of fabric and it will run the final tack down, and we will be able to finish this piece. I do want to note that this basket comes in 2 sizes, and I am doing the large size. After it does the tack down, then it made a guide to trim on, which is this outside stitching. And now this piece is done and just ready to be trimmed and turned. I'm going to wait and do all 3 together. So I will just pop this out of the hoop and set that aside. So let's move on to the other 2 pieces. So I will select OK for finish embroidery, and I will go to the home and cancel this pattern and go back to embroidery and to my USB. And I am going to do the back, and that is the plain piece and not the one with the flowers. So I will choose that next piece, and I will hit set. Now the directions call for an 8x12 hoop, which I don't have, so I was planning on using my 7x12, but I actually think it will fit into a 6x10. So I am going to try that. I do have a 6x10 hooped with the medium cutaway stabilizer. I'm going to go up to setting and I will go to my 6x10 hoop and select OK, and it looks like it just fits, and so I will select embroidery, and it does fit. So I am going to use my 6x10 hoop for the large design. I will go to my minus plus needle, and the first thing it's going to do is a placement line. So it just ran the placement, which is the square piece first. There are two parts to this back base. This square piece will go against the wall when the basket is finished. And so this needs the shape form, which is again that stiff kind of felt-like material. And I am going to center it between the top and the bottom placement, but I am just going to scoot it right past the left hand mark and just put one piece of tape to hold. And that's because the stitching ends about right here. And so I will have a little piece that I can use for something else, possibly. Just make sure that it's over those stitching lines. So now I will do the tack down. Now the next step is going to do that half circle that will become the bottom of the basket. And it will be basically the same thing. It will do a placement line, and instead of placing the shape form, I will just use regular batting and tack that down and then trim. So after placing the fabric and doing the quilting, this is now what the design looks like. And now I'm ready to place the straps. I did put a bright color in. It doesn't matter what color, it's just something you need to see so that I can place the straps. Now, the piece of leather, faux leather that comes with the kit, I went ahead and used a pressing cloth and lightly ironed it to get some of the folds out. Definitely use a pressing cloth if you choose to do that. Now, the directions don't say to cut this to a certain length, so I'm assuming that what they sent is what we need. And so it's important that we put the right side facing up. And so that's the right side, and the wrong side, you can tell it's been folded in and pressed. And so we need the right side up, and we are going to center the straps in those marks. And the reason it needs to be right side up is because this is the back that goes against the wall. And so when this flips up, the right side will be facing the front of the basket. If you put the right side together with this, then when this flips up to hang, you will be looking at the wrong side. So make sure that you put right side up. It says about a ½ inch above these little lines and tape. And I guess if you wanted a shorter strap, you could. I'm just going to use the whole thing. So I have it centered between those marks, and I'm going to tape. And then it's just important to make sure that this is not, twisted. Just lay it straight and make sure that this doesn't twist. And then put the other side. So it looks like that. For the lining, the rest of the piece that I have, I am just going to fold it in half and cut down the middle. I'm not going to cut the size that the directions call for. I think it calls for 2 separate sizes. They're about the same, but as long as, this will cover, this will be good for both sizes. It'll be quite a bit larger, but it's not really enough to save by cutting down what the directions say. Now, the next thing is to stitch down these straps. And it does say to cover with the wash away topping, and it says to cover the whole thing, and that's so that it won't catch the strap and of course move it out of place. I am not going to do that. I'll just put this and save this for something else. I will use my little turning tool while it's getting ready to stitch out. I've got the top tape and I'll just hold this down and I think I'll be good. It's just going to tack these straps down. So let's do that right now. The next step is to tack the lining down. It's going to do one stitch across the top, and it says to place the lining right side down. With the Kimberbell Silky Solids, I think is what they call their solid line, there really is no right and wrong side. However, if you make this basket, with other material, then you would just want to make sure that the right sides are placed down on this step. And again, it's going to stitch right across here, so I'm just going to put this probably about even with the straps just to make sure. It's much longer down here, and I'll cut that off. It does suggest a tape. I will put a few pieces of tape, and then it's going to stitch around. Now remember, this has the strap, and so it's not going to lay flat, and it's going to be kind of bumpy. And so I will just kind of try to keep it flat, flattish when it's stitching. I think also what I'm going to do, instead of just letting this excess hang off, it's going to stitch about right, this outline. So I have quite a bit left. So I think I'm just going to turn under about 1.5 inches, make sure that I'm not, anywhere near this part. And that's just to be able to get to my hoop. And then I'm going to kind of not pull tight, but just a little taut, and I will tape it. And so that will kind of help smooth this out. And again, the first stitch will just do one line across, and then after that, it will go around the whole entire piece. All right, this next design is done. I will remove the tape and take it out of the hoop, and then I will set it aside with our first piece, and I will trim these all up at the same time. So this is what your piece should look like. The lining, of course, on the back you can see where we quilted, and the stitch that it just stitched around is going to be our trimming line. So I'm going to set this aside and let's start our third design. So I'm finished embroidering. I will go home, cancel the pattern, and go back to embroidery and to my USB. And now I will bring up the cute design with the flowers and hit set. And you can see that this is too big for my 6x10, so I need to change the settings. I, again, don't have the 8x12, which is what this large design recommends. I am going to see if my 7x12 will work. So I have to choose my 8x12 because I don't have a setting for 7x12. I'm going to select OK, and I'm going to put my 7x12 hoop in the machine, and I will be able to scoot it over and have enough room to compensate for the fact that I have a smaller hoop. So let me get that set up. I'm going to use the same type of stabilizer, and we'll start stitching this out. So I've loaded my 7x12. I will select embroidery, and now again, because my machine has an 8x12 selected, I need to go out to layout and move, and I am going to move it down just so it's a little bit closer to the bottom. I don't need to do that, but what I do need to do is move this all the way to the left. It won't be much, but this little extra amount should compensate for the fact that I have a smaller hoop in my machine. All right, so I will go select OK, and to my minus plus. So I put the batting down, tacked it, trimmed it, and just ran the placement line for the fabric. And if you noticed how I was about maybe 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch from my foot to the side of my hoop, it worked perfectly fine, but that is why, again, I moved my design to the left, because my machine thinks my hoop is wider, and so I wanted to make sure that I didn't hit the side of my hoop. And so anytime I use my 7x12, I move the design all the way to the left to compensate for the fact that my machine, again, thinks I have a hoop that's larger. So it worked great, and so now I need to place the fabric and we'll tack it down. This fabric is that linen fabric, so we're on the outside fabric, and I will put it over the placement. I am going to put a little bit more down towards the bottom. And after I tack it down, the next step is the quilting. So the quilting is done, and I want to note that on this, as well as the back that I just finished stitching, there are some little tick marks that we're going to need when we sew this together, and they're right here. I'm just going to mark them with this little friction pen, and then there's one over here, and that will become important when it's time to do the matching and sewing this together. So it's hard to see because of the same color. You could always use a more visible color when you do the tack down, and then those would stand out, but they are just, it looks like about 1/4 of an inch from the edge. So now it's time to start our cute flower design. I do want to mention that the color that I've been using for all the quilting so far is my linen color, and that is the color that is called for in this pattern. However, I'm just going to use threads that I have on hand for the remaining colors. If I have a color that they've used and they list the colors here, then I'll use it. I'm not sure if I have any of these other colors other than the linen, so I will just pick something that I like. These are just wildflowers, and so I'll just try to find something that might be close. So let's get started. So now we're on our last step, but I want you to notice how great this detail in those large flowers are, all from the embroidery. I love it. So now I need to take my lining fabric, and this will be right side down. Again, this solid of Kimberbell does not have a right or wrong side. However, if you're using another fabric, then you would put right side down and just cover all of the stitching lines. Mine, remember, I cut big, so I have quite a bit of room. The first thing it's going to do is stitch this curved edge, and then it will stitch an outline that will be our trimming line. So here is what this looks like, and I will pop it out of the hoop, and you can see that there is the stitching line that will stay, and then this outside basting, you can tell it's a bigger stitch, that will be our trimming. For the 3D flowers and leaves, the file looks like this. It has all three sections of the flowers. It has the petals, the fringe, and the leaves, and it fits into a 5x7 hoop, and you will use a wash away stabilizer. Now in the kit, there are the felt for the leaves and the felt for the flowers, and then they have two larger, brighter green felt, and I am honestly not really sure what these are for. They are not showing to use this color anywhere in either of these projects, so I'm not sure if that's just extra or if I'm completely missing something. But I'm going to set this larger pieces aside, and I will just do these smaller pieces. So let's get started. I will go to embroidery and to my USB, and I will pull up the felt flowers file, and again it has all three steps, and I will run this file 3 times. I will hit set, and I need to change my hoop, and I need to change it to my 5x7 and select OK. So I will hit this minus plus needle. Now the first step is to sew this fringe that will be the center of the flower, and I am going to use a water soluble bobbin. You can also, it says, use a contrasting color of thread. I am going to be using yellow thread for the fringe, and you would just need to use something like maybe bright pink or black or something if you are not using a water soluble bobbin. However, with that being said, I have tried the fringe technique on a different project without the water soluble, and it did not work. It didn't work. So if you're going to do Kimberbell, I would suggest, taking the opportunity to get the water soluble thread. It's seconds that this fringe will be ready, and it's just great to have. Now I do suggest that you keep this in a little baggie. I live in a very dry state, and so I don't necessarily need it in a baggie because of humidity, but I always keep these together so that I don't mix them up, because if you were to use this bobbin and think it was just regular thread, because it just, looks like regular thread, and somehow it got wet, your piece would fall apart. I do mark my bobbins. However, this is just Sharpie, and, eventually will get rubbed off of the plastic. So I always, when I am done with this, immediately put it back in the baggie so that there's, I always know which is my water soluble. So the very first step I need to do is put my water soluble bobbin, and we will run the first step with our yellow thread. So this first step with the water soluble bobbin is just a satin stitch, like a big long rectangle. And so the next step is to put a matching bobbin. This will just be regular bobbin thread, not water soluble. And the next stitch that it's going to do is going to run along the bottom, and it's going to tack down the fringe so that when this water soluble is soaked in water, that will hold the bottom of this together, and then the top bobbin thread will dissolve, and this will become fringe. So now we just need to run the tack down of the fringe. So here is a closer look at how the fringe is stitched. So this top is what has the water soluble bobbin underneath, and this other satin stitch, which is just a small thin satin stitch, has the regular bobbin thread, and that is what will hold all of these threads together when the water soluble bobbin is dissolved. So now the next step is to move on to the flowers, and for the flowers and the leaves I will be using matching bobbin thread since these will be able to technically be seen on both sides. So I'm going to change my bobbin and let's get started on the flowers. So I just finished the flowers and I want to show you how I placed my felt. Now, if you've ever gotten Kimberbell's kits or their instructions, they always either give you, much more than you usually need or have you cut fabric larger than needed. And so the fabric for this felt flower is meant to be placed like this, and then, you would run your flowers and then you'd be done. I, as you can see, placed mine vertical, and so I was able to save this much. I'll save it from all the felt that I'm doing, and I will just cut this and put this in my embellishment stash that I have. You know me, I love to save when I can save on materials, and so that's what I did with the felt. And then the leaves are just simply a placement line. Place the felt, tack it down, and then run the detail of the leaves. All right, let's finish this first design up. So this is what our file looks like when it's done, and you can see I did the same thing with the green felt. I just put it up in the very corner, and all this excess I will just put with my stash of embellishments. So I'm going to run this file 3 more times, and then we can start putting these flowers together. Now that all of the pieces have been stitched, I'm going to work on the flowers first. I will use my little curved straight scissors. You can use any sharp pair of scissors, and I'm going to cut about 1/8 of an inch around the petals and the leaves, and then I'm going to soak to get all of the excess wash away stabilizer off, and then set these aside to dry while I work on my basket. So I just trimmed around about 1/8 or 1/16 of an inch around all of the designs. So here's all 4 sets. And I'm just going to drop them in some warm water. And although it dissolves almost instantly, I'm going to leave them for a little bit. If you just dip them and take them out, they dry a little bit firmer or stiffer, which is if you want a firmer piece, go ahead and do that. I'm going to let them soak a little bit more. Here's the fringe. And you can see this is all my extra fabric or felt. So I'm going to put that in my Kimberbell embellishment stash. And then I'm just going to rub these to try to get off all that stabilizer. Now, again, it dissolves almost instantly, but this will, and you can see this fringe. I haven't even really had to do anything yet. And you can see it's already, that bobbin is already starting to dissolve. Okay, I think that's probably good enough. I just have warm water. So the directions say for the flowers or the petals to take them out and then kind of cup them because they'll be rounded. So I'll just kind of, you can see it's kind of cupped a little bit, and because it's that wash away stabilizer a little bit still left in, this will help keep the shape. So I will just do that to all of the petals, and then the leaves, they want them kind of pinched at the bottom like that, and then those should stay to dry. So let me finish those. So I have all these done, and I wanted to show you that when I was done with all of it, or actually the last few, I found for me, since I have long nails, that it was easier to get a better result, and I went through and did this to all of them, was to take my thumbs and kind of just press, down and out. When I was doing it before, it kind of got misshapen because my fingernail kept hitting the little piece. So that's what worked for me. And then I wanted to let these soak extra good. But here is a little fringe, and you can see I just, let them soak. And on one of the projects I did, I can't remember which one, it might have been Candy Cane Lane, they had a fringe wreath on one of the blocks, and that's before I had the water soluble thread. And I did the visible thread, or tried to do the visible thread, and when I was trying to cut it, because you would have to cut the invisible thread to release the fringe, it took me, and I'm not kidding, like 30 minutes without cutting, the fringe, to get about this much. And that's when I said, nope, I'm going to go by the water soluble. Now I do want to show that on these, you will have a long piece that will come out. I cut one side, and that's because if you remember when this was stitched, it started over, on this side, and it did one stitch across the whole length, and then it did, the satin stitch. So underneath all these, there will be one thread. See if I can show you. And that's, don't think that was done something wrong. You can see right here, this one thread, that was that first initial placement of, not really a placement, but that was that first initial stitch. And so that's normal. So you'll just need to cut that off. And then if you have, I have, some on this side, you just trim it off. All right, so I'm going to set these aside to dry and start working on cutting out the basket. So here is that small little insert that will go on the bottom to kind of give the basket shape on the bottom. And this outside line that you can tell has bigger stitching, that is our trimming line. So we're trimming right on that line. So just like that. And I'll finish this, and that's the same for all three. I will trim on this line around, and again, there's two lines. The small stitching, of course, is something that we have to keep, or we'll fall apart, and then the larger stitching is where we need to trim. Same on this. Here's the basket part. This is actually the top of the basket. This, don't cut this smaller stitching, just the large stitching all the way around. Now on some of these, I got a little bit more outside than I did. You can tell, like this, for example, is cut, and then I didn't quite get, I kind of cut to the outside. I could just try to trim it again, but I think what I'll do is just take out the stitches. Let me find where I am. And pull out the bobbin. It'll just usually just pull right out. And then I have it, you know, separated. So I do have several spots. Or I could just, oh, that one just ripped. So if that happens, you just need to release it somehow, whether it's trimming it again a little bit closer or just undoing the stitching. All right, I have a few spots, so let me finish those. So with the back, once you've trimmed, it will open up like this with the little handle. And this, the same thing. This, of course, has a little bit of a curve, but it opens up. And then this we still need to turn, and so they want a 2-inch slit in the middle, and so you just have to make sure to pull the lining up. Remember, there's the shape form, which is kind of stiff, so just make sure that you pull and just give it a little cut, and then just cut something where you can turn it. And I'm going to trim these corners, and then I'm also going to just notch, not really notch, but just clip around this whole curve so that it'll lay flat, or lay flatter when I turn it. And don't cut the stitching. So I flipped it in. You can see what the bottom looks like. You know, this will be at the bottom of the basket. You won't even really see this with all this cute quilting. But after I turned it, then I'm just going to poke this out and kind of run my little tool down the side just to make sure everything's nice and poked out. And then I'm going to give that a press. You could do something with that, but again, that just sits in the bottom. But I will iron that so that it lays flat. And then for the back, remember, this will be against the wall, and that's why we put this right side when we sewed it, so this will go towards the front. So what I need to go do, and I'll use a pressing cloth, is I need to just give this a good press for right now. It'll just help in, you know, the end. So I'll press that down so that the lining, you know, doesn't come to the top. I'll do my best to get that nice and pressed like that. Same thing with this one. Now this is curved. There's really not a whole lot of room to clip. I might make a few tiny clips. I don't want to get that stitching. honestly know if this will really do anything, but I'm going to do it. Yeah, I cut pretty close, so we'll see. So this is the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and go work at getting this lining so that you can't see it from the front. So I want it to look like that. And I'll give it a press, and again, that will just help later on at the end. And the first thing they want is to clip, just like I was doing around the curves, this bottom piece that has the flowers on it, because that is going to be attached to this bottom. And so since it's a curve, if we notch these a little bit, that will help us when we're pinning it together. And these just need to be about a 1/2 inch apart. And it says just about 1/8 inch. So, you know, just, we're not going up, you know, super far, just little tiny, about the same that we did, just so that it helps go around that curve. So after I got done pressing and went to the next step, I realized that I pressed my little marks, my little tick marks out. I use a pen that is heat erasable. And so I just remarked them so you can see, and I can see right here the little stitching. And then I do need a center mark, and I didn't mark that when I was stitching out. I forgot there was a center one. So all I did was fold this in half and then mark that center. So if you go to put this together after you've ironed and wonder where your marks are, it's probably because you used a heat erasable, because, you know, I ironed the whole thing. So then on this, the back piece, the piece that's quilted, I went ahead and folded that and also marked the center so that I can line these two up to start pinning. So we're going to pin and sew this curve section. I also want to note that on this back piece that has the handle, I forgot to mark the tick marks, and I can see them. They're right here, and they pretty much line up with the center of this, you know, this piece between those two shapes, I should say. You might be able to see one right here. So I'm just going to mark those so I can see them better. Then to get this half in half, there might be a tick mark. Yeah, it looks like it's right there. I just folded it in half and marked that because I forgot to mark those when I was done quilting. So now I have a center mark and 2 end marks on the front, and I have a center mark and 2 end marks on the back. So I need to line those up. So I am going to flip the front with the flowers right side up, and it might help maybe if I transfer that marking to the front. Probably not really necessary. I think I can see that right there. I think that one's right here. Okay, so I need to put the right side up and the right side down, which is the side that has the quilting. It's that linen fabric. And I'm going to match those 3 marks. So the center, I will pin. You could probably clip. And then I'm going to mark this tick mark to the other tick mark. I'm just going to swing it down. Notice that it's not, you know, you haven't done anything to that. I'm just going to mark those, or not mark them, but match them and then pin it. And I'll do the same thing for this one. I'll just take this mark and match it. And pin it. Then I will just ease, and you can see because we clipped it, it just kind of, you know, naturally curves around. This side looks pretty good. I think with these I can just use clips. I think I might just go get clips for those. And same with this one. This one's, you can see a little bit high, so I would just need to kind of, you know, work it so that they are even. You know what, I have pins here, I'll just use pins. And so then just pin a couple of times to keep that edge lined up. And again, this one kind of lines up and has done a pretty good job at staying. I will put a couple of pins because we're going to sew this, and we definitely want it to stay in place. Just kind of ease it. So this is what it looks like, and this will be, you know, kind of wrinkly for right now. So I'm ready to sew, and I wanted to note a few things. We just have the quilted pieces pinned together. The lining for both pieces are out of the way. And then it's important to start and stop where those little tick marks are. We don't want to sew past those because that little 1/4 of an inch will swing and get sewn when we do the side. So only stitch 2 and end at the tick marks. So I started at that little mark, so that little 1/4 of an inch is not sewn, and then the same on this end. Not again to swing and be caught in this next seam. So before I sew up the sides, I'm going to just kind of fold this in and check to make sure that I didn't miss a spot, or, you know, sew a pleat that I could, you know, change and fix right now, and I think it looks good. All right, so let's go to the next step. Now, before I can start sewing up the side, I need to clip the back piece. So here is the back piece that will go against the wall. It has the handle attached. And here is that little tick mark. And I just need to clip right at that tick mark, not, you know, just going as far as the stitching to the other seam, which is, you know, just barely. So I'm not cutting the front. I'm going to kind of hold that back. This is just the back piece, and I'm just going to snip. Just, you know, probably a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch, and I'll do that on this side. So here's the back piece. And make sure I don't clip the front that has the flowers on it. So I'm going to kind of hold that. See if I can get it. So here is that little tick mark. And I'm just going to make sure, again, I'm not cutting this. I'm going to hold that back, and I'm just going to snip. And that will just make it easier when we're pinning these together, that now this can turn. And so you'll see how we can line up the sides now. And that's why we didn't stitch past that little tick mark on the front, is because we need that 1/4 of an inch to be the next seam allowance. So I'm going to pin just a couple of pins down. This is lining up the both quilted pieces right now. I'll do the same thing on the other side. And then I am going to, from here, I am going to pin the lining from both. I'm going to tuck this strap down in the middle, just so it doesn't get caught. And then one piece, the backing has that long kind of oval end. The front piece it just is a rectangle. So I'm going to pin from the front because I'm going to stop where that rectangle ends. That's where I'm going to stop sewing. And I will do the same to the other side. And then we will sew this seam 1/4 of an inch on both the quilted and the lining side, again stopping when you get to this part of the lining. I forgot to mention, they want you to start sewing both times on the quilted piece, the piece that's rounded. And that's because as you're sewing down, sometimes if you pinned, and I'm not sure if you could tell on the video that I had to adjust my lining. And so if something needs to be adjusted, you wouldn't want that to be on the quilted part. So instead of flipping this around and starting up here, I'm going to turn this over and start from this edge. So now that the sides are stitched up, I need to turn this inside out, and then we're going to sew the lining closed. Curve looks good in the back. So now this will just be wrong sides together, and we will just, even though this is square and this is round, you just kind of put them together. Let me find the center. And again, this will be at the very bottom with that insert. You'll never see this. It's going to be, you know, a seam on the right side. So technically it's, you know, you would be able to see it. But again, that's not, you could serge this, or I guess if you wanted, you could hand stitch it, but it's going to be down inside the basket and no one will ever see it. So it just, you just kind of line it up. And then I'll just sew, I'm going to sew a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch, and just to close that up. So here is that seam sewn, and I am going to go ahead and just go trim this down to 1/4 of an inch. And then our basket's done. So here's what it looks like when it's all sewn together and the edge is sewn, or the lining is sewn. And then you just simply tuck this inside. And because we press that, this folds a little bit better. And I think I'm going to press this again because it's, you know, been all wrinkled and had a lot of handling. But then what happens with this is that this, of course, matches the bottom. You'll put the quilting side up with the flat back towards, you know, of course, the back, and you will just put that down inside. And you can see it just gives the basket kind of a finished look inside, and it helps kind of stabilize this. But I'm going to go ahead and go press and poke out these little corners a little bit better than I did, and trim up some of the little threads, and then we'll look at it. I have 3 of the flowers put together, and I'm going to show you how I put them together. They're super cute, and they just will fit into this basket. I think what I'm going to do is stuff this basket with some tissue paper to have them stay a little bit better, but I'll worry about that at the end. So for the flower, you need to take one of the wires and just slip a bead to the top, and then just twist it so that it stays. And then right now you can just twist the whole wire down the length if you want, because we will eventually do that. So it looks like this. To attach the fringe, I am going to add a little dot of glue to one of the holes. And I will just put the fringe side up. Now I'm just going to, you don't have to put glue on the whole length of this. I am going to add just a little bit right here. And I'm going to kind of aim it towards this other hole to keep it straight. And then I will just continue. I'll add just a little bit of glue. Again, aim for this little hole. And then the last piece will overlap the first a little bit. For the petals, I'm going to put just a dot of glue in the center, and then I'm going to line it up with the base of the bead. And I am not going to put glue for these first 3 petals on the entire bottom, and I'll show you why in just a minute. So I'll just press and hold. And sometimes you have to readjust if it gets, gets off and gets a little crooked. So then the second, I'm going to do the same. I'll put a dot of blue, and then I am just going to slightly overlap that first petal. Now with the third petal, I am going to put it so that it's behind one and inside the second, instead of putting it both on the outside like this, which is, fine. But because I only did a dot of glue in the center, I'll be able to slip that petal in, and so it looks a little bit more swirled, like the flower is, blooming open. So I'll put that, tuck it inside that first petal that I put down, and then to the outside of the second petal. And I'll just keep adjusting until I'm happy with it. I can add some more glue if I, feel that the petals aren't staying as well, or once I have them how I want, I can add just a little bit more glue. So I'm going to add a little bit more to keep this one. It wasn't holding quite as good as I needed it to. So I'll just add some more and hold until it dries. So now with the next petal, I'm going to put them between petals. You wouldn't want it right behind, even with another petal. So I will just find one that looks like it could use a petal behind it. This one right here is a little open, so I'm going to put the first one behind these 2 petals. And the one petal on the left is a little bit higher than the one next to it, and so adding this petal helps to make that look a little better. Now these petals will sit a little bit higher than the other petals, but all that will be covered up at the end. And then I have one more, and I just need to decide where it looks the best. Now I'll add just a little bit more glue to hold the bottom of that. I think that looks good. I like it. Now I will shape it a little bit when I'm done to make it look like it's blooming, you know, a little bit more open, but I'll do that at the very end. For the base that goes around to cover all of these up, I am going to first just place it, and then these little ends that are open will come together, and so it will look, you know, like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put a little bit of glue just on those open ends. And press those together first. Then I know it's in the right position. Now you could just leave it and not even glue the rest, because it will stay. But if you want to, I would hold that down where you just glued, and then just flip this back up, and you can add, you know, a little bit of glue if you want, and then just fold it back down. But I definitely start with these. The first time I did this, I started back here, and I mean, it all worked fine, but this worked better and looked better. So that's the base. Then for the leaves, remember we pinched them together, so I am just going to add a tiny bit, and I am putting mine different. They're not all exactly the same. I have some that are a little bit closer, but then you just put your wire in there and pinch, and then I've been kind of just folding so that the leaves stick out like that. Now I have the 4 left. I've only put 1 on each flower. I kind of want to see where they're going to fit. I might put the other one super close. If I put them down like the picture shows, which that would be cute if it was like in a vase or something, but I don't think you're going to see that. So I'm going to wait until I have these determined where I want to put them. So for these, I have just folded. They were a little tall when I didn't fold them. You could cut them off, but I just folded the bottom up. Oh, and then also I wanted to show that you could leave them like this, or I, you know, held my hand to support and held the bead, and then I'm kind of just pressed out. Not really, you know, you don't want to really turn them, but I think that gives it more of like a blooming look. So if I put my 4, and I guess you could just stick them in, and, you know, however they lay, they lay. I'm going to try putting some tissue paper, and I have one that's I think a little bit longer. I don't know if this will work, or that you know, you wouldn't be able to see it. So I think I want this longer one to kind of be in the back, and see how that kind of now stands, and you can kind of, you know, and you could bend that a little bit forward. And to make a slight curve, I just, you know, kind of run and put pressure. And I might have to wait till I get it hung up to really put them. So what I think I'm going to do is just put the other leaf pretty close to the top, because you can see that here's one, and depending on how tall it is, you know, you're not going to see it if it's too low. So I think for the most part, I'm just going to put them, you know, kind of close. And then I'll bend it backwards, and I'll do that with all the rest. And then I'll kind of play and get them put together, and I'll show you a picture at the end.